Hello and welcome to the show with me, Jillian Godsil. Today, my guest is the CEO and co-founder of reNFT, Nick Vale. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
No, it's brilliant. Okay, before I jump into this, is a really clever idea, the reNFT. I have to say, reading through them, I'm very impressed. But it's a bit about your background. You're a mixture of gaming and property management in there too as well. So tell me just a bit, are you a gamer? Or are you a developer? Just tell me a bit about your background.
Yeah, definitely. So I have kind of a blend of a lot of things, but most of my experience kind of outside of the crypto realm is in the traditional indie game development realm. So specifically kind of back when Xbox indie games were all the craze pre-game engine days. We did two games in particular, one of which was called Total Miner. It was the first port of Minecraft to Xbox. We grew that to be the #1 best-selling indie game of all time on Xbox. From there, went on to do another game. For some reason, you'll see voxels have followed my game dev career throughout. And that game was called Miner of Duty. It was like a early builder voxel shooter combo kind of game, a lot of UGC components, which was another Xbox Live indie game, and we grew that to be #3 bestseller. So kind of from there, I personally got super deep in crypto. I had known about it for some time, but didn't really do anything until like 2014. So my brother and I were trying to do this like sports betting concept. He was bringing my way, and learned about Bitcoin through that, because at the time, right, like back then, sports betting was highly, frowned upon in most places, and Bitcoin was the perfect way to do it. Sort of scrapped the idea, but this notion of peer-to-peer money, blockchain tech, the whole rabbit hole went deep for me from a personal standpoint, research standpoint, kind of all of it. And then in 2017, I learned about NFTs through CryptoKitties, and it was really like both my worlds colliding. Like, to me, gaming assets just made sense. True ownership of your digital identity, assets, everything just clicked with me. So I went full time into the space, like end of that year, beginning of the following, at the Sandbox game. If you're familiar, where I spent about bit over 2 years developing a variety of initiatives over there.
That must be exciting, working for one of the top, metaverse players in the space. So that gave you a good grounding.
Absolutely, and that's ultimately where the core reNFT idea was kind of spun out from, in a sense.
Perfect. So reNFT. And so I'm thinking, what reNFT? Well, what is it? But it's a very clever way. Your tagline is rental infrastructure for the metaverse. So, and the more I read, I'm thinking, well, I sort of really thought, well, why do we need this? But actually, the more I read your website and the website, well, this makes total sense. So NFTs, we know that increasingly they'll have more and more utility. What started off as pure art, digital art, whatever, increasingly there's a lot of utility involved with NFTs, and you don't necessarily want to sell them.
Exactly.
So that's where the whole idea of the renting the earth. So tell me, where did the idea come up? Were you in like a pub someplace, or were you in a basement or a garage perhaps? How did the idea come about?
So, while at the Sandbox, joined a hackathon out of the Chainlink community, where I ultimately met my co-founder Naz and CTO, and we kind of hit it off. And so the idea we built for that hackathon was reNFT. So at the time, like, this is, almost 2 years ago, a year and like 9 months ago or so. At the time, like, the NFT craze and wave really hadn't even happened yet. Like, we were just scratching the surface. Virtual land at the Sandbox was starting to sell. We were doing like early waves. I think the lands were like $40 at that time. And so, we were seeing users acquiring millions of dollars with virtual land, and it's starting to increase in popularity with no other intent but to be a landlord and rent it out. And to us, it was really interesting in like that no one understood the limitations of these standards, right? The actual ERC standards. You need additional tech to be built to enable any of these kind of financialization components of NFTs. And we were kind of firm believers that, hey, there's more to NFTs than just art at the time. How
did you know that? Because obviously now we talk about utility, and it's quite, probably people talk about it a lot, whatever. But how did you know back then? Did you have like some sort of future vision thing, or how did it come about?
I think naturally, like, I've been in the crypto space some time. We watched the kind of ICO boom of like everyone launching their own token, everyone building a new DeFi primitive, then, following that and whatnot. And it was just pretty clear to me that like an NFT is just a token. It's just a representation of something, right? Digitally on a blockchain. And I think a lot of people forget that, right? They look at it as a monkey photo or as a, gaming asset. It's really just a file representation, right? Some piece of data representation that's immutable, tracks ownership, right? And completely transparent. And so like, to me, it just made so much sense. Like I've grown up gaming my whole life. We, you know, to give you an example, like we had plenty of people build all this content within our indie games, and then the Xbox Live indie game marketplaces shut down the entire program and moved towards an arcade program. And all of that was lost, right? Like all of that history of everyone putting in thousands and thousands of hours building content.
And that's the thing that people don't realize, the history bit too as well, as either a builder or even a player. If something closes down, that's gone. That's just, you know, anyway, sorry. Yeah. So you're hitting something there that people don't often think about.
Yeah. And so we were just under this firm thesis that like NFTs will start as art, they'll go into gaming. We think gaming will onboard the next, you know, 5, 10, 20 million and beyond players. And then like eventually people will wake up to the fact that, hey, this is just, if you believe in blockchain technology, an NFT is just a way to represent anything on a blockchain, right? That isn't fungible. And so we really like owned that thesis pretty early on. And I think it's starting to come closer and closer to fruition over the years.
So let's talk about some of the use cases, which actually makes it stand out. Oh, that makes sense. So Axie Infinities, we know, of course, that they have the scholarship program because you need 3 Axie characters to play, and they're quite expensive. Well, I don't know if how expensive they are now in this you know, the winter, but it's for a lot of the people who were benefiting from, I mean, obviously the Philippines story, which went through the lockdown, the whole thing. A lot of people who were benefiting didn't have the money to buy the 3 Axies. So your plan would be that you could actually rent them using your infrastructure.
Right. So like the model you're really referring to there is the guild model, which we saw explode from Axie and really trickle down into most play to earn, play and earn, however you want to phrase it, like just Web3 enabled games, right? And a lot of people don't realize what's actually happening beneath the surface there, right? How that was actually done and how it is done in most cases is through sharing an account email and password. So basically they have a wallet that's connected to that account. The owner of the asset still controls the private key. In most cases, it was a guild funding, you know, assets. They have the capital to acquire them. And then they would connect it to that account email and password on that game's centralized servers and share that. And now, you know, so what actually happened there for people to earn that percentage of revenue is they relied on what was called the scholarship manager, and is still called a scholarship manager. And they basically, their sole responsibility is keeping track of, you know, the ongoing rental. They're kind of like a property manager of sorts, but they take a piece, right? And really all they're doing is paying out revenue. And so for us, it was like a primitive needs to exist. Like the fact that we have a third party, we have this supposedly automated, trustless, transparent tech of smart contracts, yet we have account email sharing passwords, a third party splitting revenue.
It sounds a bit Web 2, doesn't it?
Exactly. And even worse, right? Because you could automate that in a Web 2 scenario, just super centralized. In this case, you know, and that scholarship manager, by the way, was taking a percentage anywhere from like 15 to 30%, depending on the guild. And so we sort of, in the guild model, solve one of their biggest headaches, which is scaling their hiring, right? We automate that, we cut that person out pretty much completely, and allow them to focus on their other issue, which is capital and acquiring assets and acquiring the right assets.
That is cool. And are the games, are Axie Infinity talking to you, or you hope to talk to them by them bringing your software in?
Yeah, we aren't. We're dealing with a lot of games across all blockchains. Right now, we're live on ETH. We're about to launch a pretty substantial integration on Avalanche. Polygon's essentially there, and Solana as well. So those are where we're talking with most games right now, because it's important for us to also just democratize the ability for users to lend and rent assets. Like someone like myself, I have a lot of gaming assets across different games. I can't play them all at once. I don't necessarily have time, but I'm involved in the ecosystem. I don't want to sell them. But if there was an easy way, I could just generate some yield to some other player that wants to come in, try out this game, try out this world that otherwise would cost them, you know, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 to try. I would love to do that, but I can't easily do that without running a full-time business, right?
Okay, so, and I actually want to point out too as well that you mentioned about the different chains. You're blockchain agnostic. You aim to be everywhere. Okay, so another couple of nice use cases that made sense to event tickets. Explain the thinking behind that.
Yeah, so we're gaming focused right now, and the main reason just because we believe that gaming gets us to those broader cases, right? Like that's where the real activity and excitement is. Now, there's a lot of interesting ones, especially anywhere there's this token gated access spinning up. And we're doing a lot of experimenting with different projects there as well. So like you see your NFT is really locked into one basket right now. You have IP rights, you have like maybe some gaming functionality, some real life event ticket, a PFP, and there's no way to really separate those out, right? So a lot of what we're doing around rentals is starting to separate out that use right? So say there's a, like NFT NYC, there's all these events people are trying to go to, they're buying NFTs to go, and then they're selling them after the fact, right? Whereas you could have a pretty seamless option of you have holders with multiple NFTs and they're halfway around the world and they don't plan to go, and you have some user who wants to experience that community, and perhaps even them experiencing it could sell them on joining that community, right? To actually like have that accessibility. And so event tickets, I think, are just a really fascinating one, but more broadly, anywhere there's this like token gated access, we're firm believers that like influencers will come and they'll start to have like meaningful fan interaction groups, where like subscription model rental pools can be spun up and these kind of things off of our base protocol.
And the idea is that the holder of the original event ticket, whatever the token, it's not just a once-off thing. There could be multiple rewards, interactions, access to different things. So while you can't go to NFT NYC every year, perhaps, but there's other things that are happening and you don't necessarily want to give up your ticket. So very clever again. Another idea you had too as well, down these places, virtual land. What can you do there? Obviously, this year come back to your sandbox days, your alma mater.
So I think it just depends on which metaverse. There's obviously very open metaverses. There's closed private land metaverses like the Sandbox, like Bored Ape's Other Side, right? And these lands have skyrocketed. And, a lot of people are incredibly excited about the other side, but a land costs, a few ETH, right? Which is, I don't know what they are right now, but call it $5,000, right? Or even if it's $1,000, it's a huge hurdle for your average Web2 gamer, right? They already are used to a free-to-play model where they don't want to even spend $60 on a game anymore, let alone a few thousand, right? And so I think rentals are, and even like reward share automation rentals are very interesting for virtual land. You have these kind of different metaverses forming that are becoming like the Manhattan of virtual real estate, right? And I think you'll have open metaverses that anyone can have any amount of land, Minecraft style. You'll have more closed metaverses in a sense where anyone can come in and visit them, but to own land, it's a much deeper level. So I think we're seeing a bit of a blend, and rentals get really exciting around a lot of those land metaverses.
So looking also, you mentioned in your website, again, the use cases, the temporary assets. If you need a black tie outfit to go to a certain event, you could rent that off somebody rather than having, because I mean, who wears black tie every day, even on their avatar?
Totally. Like digital fashion, I think is really early, right? But as more and more people spend time in these virtual spaces, the natural progression is they want to express themselves more and more, right? And, in the same way that you have 100 skins in Fortnite, but you can only use one, the same model can be applied, and you could, have somebody else utilizing those skins, to use that example, just to express themselves, or maybe it's for an event, or maybe it's for like a show. Like we're seeing large fashion brands start to do digital events and virtual events. So it's like, how does that transcend as a whole into this new realm?
So what's the business model then for reNFT? Are you going to do people own label your infrastructure, or do they come to you? Explain to me how it works.
Yeah, so essentially, like the best way to put it is we're a white label protocol infrastructure first and a platform second. So we work directly, like to unlock, I guess, first important note, collateral-free, trustless, automated rentals. We have to have the project side integration wherever that rental utility lies, right? Which in most of our focus right now is games. So we're working with most of the top games across all blockchains to build plug and play infrastructure for them. That's also not only saving them a ton of time, but our core focus is that product, as well as like building composability into other protocols. So we kind of do both, but the actual revenue model comes into play where we take a percentage of the lender's rental income when we do enable a fee. The protocol fee set to 0 for adoption, but we're already seeing some games that want to start enabling that to build up a treasury. We rev share that back directly with the game as well.
And you're also set up as a DAO. How's that going to work?
Yeah, so I think a lot of projects say they're DAOs these days. As our DAO actually kind of rolls out and decentralizes over time, it gets really interesting around all those different integrations. So like on one hand, when we enable rentals in, you know, different ecosystem, like take Sandbox, for example. We enable rentals in there. We or enabling sand as a payment token, right? So technically we're collecting us reNFT the income in sand. And so let's say Sandbox is 80% of our activity, you know, in a way their success is our success, and we don't want to sell off their token entirely, right? Sure, there's some overhead, but in a perfect world, our DAO starts to get really interesting where we're holding game tokens directly correlated off of real activity. So it's like a much more calculated index rather than like some of these shotgun approach indexes where let's buy a ton everywhere and see what happens. So like we like to get really entwined with those gaming ecosystems, stake back into theirs, you know, reward programs with their different users, all kinds of different things. And then as well, like the DAO gets very exciting with like fee proposals. Like, you know, maybe if they're providing 80% of their activity, we operate like a traditional payment provider where they can put up a proposal that, hey, our fee should be less that you're taking. And there's no reason it shouldn't be, right? So that's just one way. We haven't talked too much about that yet because we're really just focused on integrations and true activity before putting out any kind of token.
So where are you on your roadmap now, Nick?
Right now is integrations. Like that's our core focus. Our team.
You're building your community basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we, you know, since we actually publicly announced the protocol, we're a bit over a year and a half old. We're doing a lot. The games are finally starting to become alive, right? Like some products are actually finishing development over the next 6 months to a year, right? And rolling out. And I'm super excited to see them come live. So we're doing a lot of custom functionality build outs within these games. We're working directly with the guilds, the largest ones there are, to build functionality that they want to see as well. And then we're also just scaling the team. So, you know, we're almost live on pretty much all the major blockchains with games, and doing integrations, tailoring like day in and day out. So
that's fantastic. And then you also raised a lot of money recently. What's that going to be used for?
Yeah, so we closed our seed round way back, which was 1.5 led by Animoca, and then we recently announced our additional round, which was 5 million co-led by Mechanism and Gumi, with some really strong partners like Gemini, OpenSea, tons of exciting ones in there. And so that's really just to continue scaling. So like our vision has gotten broader. We are like truly the only ones with an actual rental product building infrastructure for all these different environments. So it's really about scaling. Our team.
I suppose you need the money to keep on building because you're doing a lot of free stuff to get the thing off the ground.
Yeah, and we recognize that like a lot of these virtual environments are ways out. Like we're backlogged by games in a way, and actually interesting cases that are also building. And so we really recognize that, and we thought the markets were in an interesting spot. So we want to make sure we have runway for years to come.
Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, chat to you, ask you for a loan, whatever?
So reNFT.io is our website. Does a great job of explaining everything. There's developer docs to even dive into. We do build in the open so people can build off the protocol as well. And then our Discord and Twitter, reNFT Labs, great ways to get involved. In our Discord, we have a Mission Astro program where there's ways to earn in the community, ways to get involved. That's like kind of our DAO starting to form. There's a lot of users like building graphics or memes or, you know, research pieces. So definitely get involved and stop by.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I love it. It's when I heard it first, I went, what is it about? And then and I must commend you for being very, very futuristic, because we're all saying now utility, but it wasn't utility back when Beeble was selling his, whatever, 3,000 days. I mean, it was like, oh my God, it's art. So congratulations on the raise as well. And I'll be following your progress with interest.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and thanks for having me.